Today we are going to be covering Chapter 8 of Propaganda. If you want to follow along without using the video, you can find the show notes at howtoeatanelephant.xyz. You can also find a donate button there that I would really appreciate you hitting if you like what I'm doing. If you don't want to donate but still want to help me out, you can do the subscribe, like, comment, share the video with anyone that you think might find it interesting. Now, if you are following along, you can see here that my notes are highlighted in the blue color, and the orange and yellow designate what I find important and very important. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. With all that out of the way, let's get started with Chapter 8 of Propaganda. It's titled Propaganda for Education. This chapter is a lot like the last chapter, where the modern day propaganda for education might be seen a little differently than how Bernays presents it. He's more interested here in using the schools, the universities, the institution to propagandize the people in accepting them, not so much today where we might see the teachers actually kind of propagandizing the students. He begins, "Education is not securing its proper share of public interest. The public school system, materially and financially, is being adequately supported. There is a marked eagerness for a college education and a vague aspiration for culture, expressed in innumerable courses and lectures. The public is not cognizant of the real value of education and does not realize that education as a social force is not receiving the kind of attention it has the right to expect in a democracy. Education does not attract the active interest of the public." And I simply say here that some things never change, while many more people are going to college these days and have been for the past maybe 2 generations. The actual value in education I don't think is seen, and I think there's a big discrepancy between what you learn in school and in actual education. I think Mark Twain said something like, "I'd never let school get in the way of my education." Bernays continues, "In a democracy, an educator should, in addition to his academic duties, bear a definite and wholesome relation to the general public." I think this sounds dangerously similar to the whole "it takes a village" or "your children are not yours alone." They're everyone's children. Again, this is 100 years ago, and we see the outcome of that thinking today. He continues, "In the field of education, we find what we have found in politics and other fields, that the evolution of the practitioner of the profession has not kept pace with the social evolution around him, and is out of gear with the instruments for the dissemination of ideas which modern society has developed. If this be true, then the training of educators in this respect should begin in the normal schools, with the addition to their curricula, whatever is necessary to broaden their viewpoint." And here we see that teachers today have a much broader viewpoint. Beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic, which I think we can all agree would be something they would teach, the teachers today also teach things like activism and gender studies, even things like racism in the negative sense. What they certainly do not teach is things like financial literacy or even civics. Here, even Bernays keeps talking about democracy. He's speaking specifically about the United States. We're not a democracy. We shouldn't be a democracy. We're a representative republic, and there's a really big difference there. He continues, quote, "The normal school should provide for the training of the educator to make him realize that his job is twofold: education as a teacher and education as a propagandist." And here we see what I think is pretty important, that while Bernays is alluding to teachers being able to convince the public of their importance through the propaganda, but if you take it a little more literally, and we see with hindsight what is going on today, that modern teachers are propagandizing their students to what I'll collectively call progressive ideologies. Now, I wouldn't also want to see conservative ideologies pushed either. I think that schools should be neither progressive or conservative, left or right, liberal or what have you, but also both. So it should be neither and both. School would be a place where you should be able to discuss both sides. And when I say school, I'm really talking about college. Now, if we stick to like the K through 12 schools, they should realistically barely even touch on these modern topics, and they really should stick to the essentials for your day-to-day life in the Republic. Now, higher education should allow all sides to make their case in something like an open debate. And we can see that as of at least 2024, this isn't even close to happening. For probably 10 years now, universities have been shutting down anyone that kind of disagrees with whatever their ideology is. Now here I'm going to add the long march through the institutions. I think I mentioned this a few chapters ago, but it is perfectly applicable here. So if you go back to maybe the 60s or 70s, you'll find progressive teachers getting entry-level jobs. And then over the next 30 or 40 years, they spread their ideas to the students. But some of these progressive teachers move on into the administration, they become tenured, and as they gain more influence within the institution, hence the long march through the institutions, they end up hiring more like-minded teachers. Now, this doesn't have to be some kind of thought-out conspiracy among the teachers. It's simply kind of like a natural selection. If you have these kind of ideas, you're going to be instinctively and naturally attracted to other people that share those kind of ideas, so you're going to hire more like-minded teachers. And so we see within 1 or 2 generations, this 30 or 40 years, the entire education edifice goes from once being left-leaning but open-minded all the way to extremely left-leaning and close-minded. And again, today, I think you can look anywhere. When Donald Trump got elected, however many years ago that was, for the first time, there was what they called the Battle for Berkeley. There was the riots, if you will, in Evergreen College. And there was a lot more of this sort of open hostilities towards ideas, and in many cases, like flat-out violence against people who had opposing opinions in the schools. Now, like I said, I don't think Bernays is talking about this directly, but I think his ideas of let's make the teachers propagandists so that they can sell education to the public, I think the natural conclusion of that is, well, these teachers have these propagandist tools, so let's use them on the students. He continues, he himself, the teacher, is but moderately or poorly paid. Judging himself by the standards in common acceptance, he cannot but feel a sense of inferiority because he finds himself continually being compared in the minds of his pupils with the successful businessman and the successful leader in the outside world. And I think here that this adds fuel to the fire when it comes to the long march through the institutions. You hear that teachers teach because it is their calling and it is what they love to do. It's almost kind of like the starving artist thing. And while this may be true, it certainly would preclude anyone that values money from pursuing a job as a teacher. And this leaves a very fertile ground for the teacher activist to take root. The quote-unquote best minds can earn more elsewhere and are not driven by ideology. The activists don't necessarily care about money and are more concerned with their revolution. I'm reminded of that old adage, those who can do, those who can't teach. He continues, the teaching profession as such has the right to carry on a very definite propaganda with a view to enlightening the public and asserting its intimate relation to society which it serves. In addition to conducting propaganda on behalf of its individual members, education must also raise the general appreciation of the teaching profession. Unless the profession can raise itself by its own bootstraps, it will fast lose the power of recruiting outside talent for itself. And here we can confirm that Bernays is certainly talking about teachers propagandizing the public to improve their status in society, but it also supports my point that it will be harder to recruit quote-unquote good teachers, and that it will create a vacuum that the activist teacher can move in and fill. Now, over the next few pages, I'm not going to cover what he talks about. He focuses on how universities need to raise money and how there's grants for state schools and endowments for private schools. Again, this seems pretty reasonable, and it doesn't really lead into the teachers becoming what they have become today. That said, as I mentioned before, once you teach them these skills, they can then use those skills in other ways, kind of like when all you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So you pick up the propagandist hammer and you say, oh, look, we can nail down this problem of raising money. Now that you've got that covered, and I think that the universities these days are milking either the public or the endowments for way more value than they actually provide. But now that you have this propaganda tool, maybe you can use it elsewhere. And like I said, they're using it to propagandize the students. He continues, we have, therefore, an anomalous situation of the college seeking to carry on a propaganda in favor of scholarship among people who are quite out of sympathy with the aims to which they are asked to subscribe their money. Men who, by the commonly accepted standards, are failures or very moderate successes in our American world, the pedagogues, seek to convince the outstanding successes, the businessmen, that they should give their money to ideals which they do not pursue. Men who, through a sense of inferiority, despise money, seek to win goodwill of men who love money. The college must win public support. If the potential donor is apathetic, enthusiastic public approval must be obtained to convince him. If he seeks unduly to influence the educational policy of the institution, the public opinion must support the college in a continuance of its proper functions. If either factor dominates unduly, we are likely to find a demagoguery or a snobbishness aiming to please one group or the other. There is still another potential solution to the problem. It is possible that through educational propaganda aimed at developing greater social consciousness on the mind of the people of the country, there may be awakened in the minds of men of affairs, as a class, social consciousness which will produce more minds of that type of Julius Rosenwald, V. Everett Macy, John D. Rockefeller Jr., and the late Willard Straight. Interestingly, here we have Rockefeller. I'm not sure exactly if we would, I'm not sure about these other names, but I certainly don't think we should have more Rockefellers. The era of the robber barons probably wasn't a great era to live in. And honestly, I don't think we have it much different today. We don't have Standard Oil and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the train cars, but we have, Google and Microsoft and Apple and all the, realistically, the big tech, big pharma, the stuff that really everyone complains about, rightfully so. I also found it interesting that he talks about the failures. The teachers are failures, and they seek to find monetary support from the businessmen who are successes. So this whole idea that money is the core value in America goes back a long time. He continues, the National Education Association and other societies are carrying on a definite propaganda to promote the larger purposes of educational endeavor. One of the aims of such propaganda is, of course, improvement in the prestige and material position of the teachers themselves. So again, we see here propaganda simply organizing itself under this National Education Association, and they're trying to just simply promote the idea of education. Which again, if you're reading this in context, right, step out of where we are today with our hindsight, would anyone really argue that we should promote education? Even today, no one's going to argue against that. But we see that it really is just a foothold to propagandize the students, 100 years later. I wonder even if this was the plan, if this was the aim of Bernays and whoever he was working for. Let's get the public on board with really loving education, and like I said, a few generations down the road, 60 or so % of the people, or more than that, are going to college these days. And then of the people going to college, very few of them are using their college degrees. And I'm not even talking about the bad degrees they're getting. It's just when everyone gets a college degree, it becomes not worth very much. If everyone has something, it's no longer rare. It's no longer special. Now, over the next few pages, Bernays talks about the shifts from universities being these cloistered and secluded institutions, even resenting outside interest, to essentially having PR branches that work explicitly to garner public interest in their goings-on. After this, he continues, in the ethical sense, propaganda bears the same relation to education as to business or politics. It may be abused. It may be used to over-advertise an institution and to create in the public a mind of artificial values. There can be absolutely no guarantee against its misuse. And that's how he ends the chapter. And I think that, like the last chapter on women's activities, which today we might call feminism, my comments on this chapter are not at all anti-college, but more on how propaganda was and is used to manipulate us from every conceivable angle. Again, he even says propaganda bears the same relation to education as to business or politics, and that it may be misused. Now, what I do find really interesting about this chapter is how the things have changed over the last 100-odd years. Like I said a few times here, Bernays is clearly speaking of using propaganda to promote the schools to the public, to promote education to the public. But today, and for, like I said, at least a generation or two, it has been almost expected that most people attend college. And this idea that college is the common path to a successful career has been successfully sold to the public. Now, this idea worked for a while college graduates were still rarer than non-college graduates. Though today, a college degree is not worth nearly as much since so many people have them. Now further, we see a mounting backlash against this idea of going to college, of everyone going to college. More and more Americans are no longer seeing college as the best route to a financially worthy career. Trades are finally starting to come back in vogue. This is, I think, because of several compounding reasons. First, degrees are more common and thus not seen with such prestige. Second, a lot of degrees are quite worthless in the current job market. People might make jokes about things like underwater basket weaving degrees, but while that is a joke, it does call into question certain things like the gender studies, feminist studies, art history, literature. Now, while knowledge of these things and many other less useful fields is certainly worthy of pursuit for the individuals, they simply do not translate into a financially fruitful work that the market is willing to pay for. I would say here that the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge is a noble pursuit, but if you're going into this to get this underwater basket weaving degree with the intention of financially supporting yourself and a family in the future, that might not be the best idea. I pursue a lot of things that aren't necessarily going to make me money simply because I want to learn about them. This YouTube channel is a perfect example. Like, I probably won't make a living doing this, but this knowledge I find very useful to the point where I want to share it with everyone. And the third reason I think that we're seeing this slide in accepting of college is the woke ideology that a lot of these colleges are really fully embracing. Now again, this isn't to say that this ideology is quote-unquote wrong, although I think it is, but college, like any other business, must cater to what the customer demands. And for a while, there was no one pushing back against this woke curriculum, but now they are. So if you have to give the customer what they want, what's the old saying? The customer is always right. If the American people are finally starting to sort of vote with their wallets and say, no, we're not going to send our children there because we don't like your curriculum, well, the curriculum will have to change. And this brings me to my final thought. Where once colleges were trying to sell themselves to the public via propaganda, today the professors are using this propaganda on the students. And again, the important part here is not so much what kind of propaganda the school itself is using or the professors themselves are using. It's the fact that propaganda is used in every facet of our lives to direct us this way or that. Okay, so with all that said, if you want to see the show notes for this, you can find them at howtoeatanelephant.xyz. If you like this video or have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'd love to hear any feedback from you. Like I said, if you really liked the video, there's a donate button at howtoeatanelephant.xyz that I wouldn't be against you pushing. And if you think it was useful but you don't want to donate or can't donate and you want to help me out, you can share the video, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And with all that said, I would like to thank you for your time and attention and say that I hope you have a good night.